Michael, thank you for being with us today. You've got such a long resume. Would you just allow me to read just a couple of things for the audience, because everybody may not be as familiar with your background as I am. Michael Steele was elected Lieutenant Governor of Maryland in 2003. Then in 2009, he became chairman of the Republican National Committee. As chairman of the RNC, Michael Steele was charged with revitalizing the Republican Party. A self-described Lincoln Republican, under Steele's leadership, the RNC broke fundraising records during the 2010 congressional race, and the Republicans won 63 House seats, the biggest pickup since 1938. His commitment to grassroots organization and party building at the state and local levels produced 12 governorships and the greatest share of state legislative seats since 1928. And Michael, how did the Republicans treat you after those kind of accomplishments?
They fired me, but that's
okay. that's when
personal.
That's when I remember meeting you and you going, just in awe of what you had accomplished. And it was like, hey, how did it turn out? And one last thing I want to share with the audience, because I got such a kick out of this. This was in the Atlantic, and they quoted you. And this is Michael Steele, as I know Michael Steele. So they were talking about Michael, and they said, he cannot, however, sign on to the party of Trump. And this is Michael's quote, I don't need reporters and these so-called Republicans coming up to my face, pointing their finger at me, telling me I'm a rhino, a Republican in name only, he said. Kiss my ass, I haven't changed, baby, you have. You're the one embracing crazy, not me. Greatest quote ever.
Needless to say, they won't be rehiring me either.
I gotta believe that there's probably a few strained relationships here. When you're looking at this today, and I know, we were talking a little bit earlier when people were registering that you and I, we tried to get this lined up in October, and I know you were just way too busy in October. But I think both of us agreed that we thought, well, by November 24th, the election is old news. And
no, I knew it wouldn't.
You did, yeah.
No, I work on several committees that were very much involved in the continuation of the election process after November 3rd, because just by the virtue of the way the whole election landscape had laid out. So, yeah.
Yeah, as a fellow Republican, I don't know what to do anymore with my party. What's your thoughts on that?
So let me thank you first off, Ryan. I really appreciate being here. Good morning, NABOE. I hope everyone's doing well. Thanks for joining us this morning. I always enjoy my conversations with men and women who are the backbone of our economy. In this state, small business owners and folks who are taking that entrepreneurial spirit and really doing something exciting with it. And I know it's been tough. It has been a tough year with COVID-19 laying a heavy blanket on not just the economy, but on jobs and opportunities and innovation and a whole network of things that we've taken for granted, like health and mobility and so forth. So I appreciate what a lot of you have had to weather and will continue to weather, I believe, well into probably second quarter of next year. So the realities of this political season have never been more stark and difficult for a variety of reasons. There was the trifecta of events that converged that required the kind of high-level attention that unfortunately they didn't get. The first, of course, was COVID-19. The onset of the virus, really going back to December of 2019, was when Our government, CDC, was first made aware through the networks of the World Health Organization and other European capitals that there was something happening. Then on top of that, the flattening of the economy, which was doing very well, and had even though it was robust, it was not necessarily robust in all areas, but they were catching up. We all know how that goes with various sectors of the economy, and certainly the impact on particular communities within that economy. And then, of course, third was the civil unrest that was born out of the murder of George Floyd on May 25th, that really sent the nation roiling. Not even so much about the violence that was a part of the narrative for certain states and areas of the country, but it really called up a lot of the racial tensions that have permeated our communities since 1619. And it has been a very delicate balance for a lot of people to come to a full circle moment, if you will. Well, a 180 is not a 180 moment, where you go back 4 or 5 years on Black Lives Matters, the initial responses to Colin Kaepernick and the taking of the knee, to where we are today. And you can see in that relatively short period of time, the emotional, political, psychological, and racial movement in this space. So you have these three big items that went pop. All right, do something with it. And of course, for at least two of them, the expectation is that the administration would be on point, especially with respect to the virus, because that was something that was not just impacting us, but impacting the world. So there was a global connection, and there were global resources, information, et cetera, that could be shared and learned from, and that would help us actually kind of get ahead. And as we tend to be leaders in this space, when these types of things occur, the expectation was the United States would assume that sort of leadership role once we got the full nature of what we're dealing with here, and working with our European partners, our partners in Asia, the African continent, and figure out exactly what are the best steps. Well, the president pulls us out of the World Health Organization. We come to find out later from the Bob Woodward tapes that there were political calculations that the president himself was making, irrespective of his chief of staff and others in the White House senior leadership, that he didn't want to, quote, make a big deal of it. Well, here we are now, almost 260,000 Americans dead later, over 9 million, more than that now, infected. And we're about to go into what some are saying will be the worst version of this virus, as some scientists have noticed. There are aspects of the virus that have mutated. And we're now going into the winter season. We're in the cold and flu season, which is enough on its own. And of course, after being locked up essentially for 9 months, people, Thanksgiving and holidays want to get together. I think it was reported some 3 million people flew yesterday, were on planes going, for holiday gatherings, and all of that has an impact. So the weight of this election really came down to the response to COVID-19. Despite everything else, despite where the economy was before it flatlined, it turned out that would be the seminal decision for this administration in terms of what it did, what it didn't do, and how that would move the needle politically, particularly for suburban white voters, and for other communities that were disproportionately affected, Hispanic, African American community, how they were impacted would factor into their ultimate response. Then, of course, you had for the Black community, the realities of the Floyd killing and the lack of compassionate response to it. The walk across Lafayette Park with the Bible was the ultimate humiliation for a lot of Americans, and certainly for a number of African Americans. It was one of those moments that crystallized, with a law and order message, the lack of hearing and understanding what was going on inside the community. Despite the concerted efforts of many inside the administration who tried to counsel the president to get ahead of these narratives and to really come out of the gate with one of the strongest assets, even though the economy had taken a hit with COVID-19, there were elemental aspects and arguments that could be made about where the economy was. Yes, the COVID has smacked it, but the recovery, and there was recovery. I mean, you look back of the near 23 million jobs that were lost from COVID-19 initially, 11 million of those jobs were recovered. They weren't new jobs, as the president would say. They were jobs that were recovered. In other words, employers either hired back their employees or started up operations again. If they hadn't laid off their employees, they started up their operations again and it reignited payrolls, et cetera. So you had that argument that could be made, and yet it was not. And a number of people that I've spoken to about that they were concerned and they were confused, because very much like we saw in 2018, the president didn't make his best case for what they had done up to that point on the economy, the strength of the economy, the continuation of growth from the Obama administration, but particularly the last few years of Obama, making, I think, a good argument around, Black unemployment, the opportunity zone effort, certainly what the administration had done in criminal justice reform. So there were a number of what you would say cogent arguments that could be made. And it's still, it's not a mystery. I mean, knowing Donald Trump as I have come to know him after working with him over the years, he has in his mind, he plays it out in his mind, what works. And his instincts are incredibly good about that. But I think the miscues on COVID-19 was an underappreciation of just how serious it was and just how deep the impact would be. The idea that it would literally upend the economy the way it did was something that no one had really calculated. And so the idea of kind of playing it off as something not too serious, doing the whole politics of calling it the China virus and all of that really missed the mark for a lot of voters, because what they were looking for, as divided as the nation is and remains, they were looking for the kind of leadership that would help them get through it and help them process what was happening. Remember, you're talking about people who are on a cell phone trying to talk to a loved one who's in a hospital ICU dying because they can't be there to hold their hand. You're talking about families that are living separated within their home because someone in the family has contracted the virus. And so processing all of that for voters became more real and much more difficult. And of course, in a political environment, you're going to take it out on somebody. Someone's going to pay, someone's going to have to account. So we saw that reflected in a lot of the polling, which in one sense was very accurate in sort of catching the fact that the virus was the number one issue among voters. The other part of that, though, was the Democrats looking at the election, I think somewhat incorrectly, as the kind of wave opportunity because people don't like Trump, that would translate into this massive wave of voters. It did. 80 million Americans voted against Donald Trump, but some 73 plus million Americans voted for him. In fact, Donald Trump added roughly 8 to 9 million new voters over his totals in 2016. So there clearly was something else going on in the country that went beyond COVID, that people still kind of connected to Donald Trump on. And I think it's going to be interesting, and it remains to be seen how it works itself out, that people begin to understand exactly what that is and how that works and why it works the way it does. You had, of course, one of the linchpins that sort of triggered that movement back towards Trump, because there was movement away from Trump. But when after the riots that occurred and people are watching this narrative unfold on their televisions every evening, then of course the president going on air speaking specifically to white suburban women and telling them, you know, they're coming for your neighborhoods. I'm still trying to figure out who they are, but I think I know. And sort of creating this idea that they're bringing Section 8 housing to your community, meaning the poor are now going to be pouring into your communities. And, you know, the idyllic, you know, tranquil, peaceful, you know, space that you have is now going to be shattered. We saw a similar narrative in 2018 with the caravans coming across the border, you know, into, you know, suburban, you know, New York or New Hampshire or wherever. And so this idea was there that the president was stoking, and it actually resonated, because what happened was the very strong progressive left within the Democratic Party took hold of that as part of their narrative, and their explanation for the riots was to shout out, defund the police. And everybody was like, excuse me, you're gonna do what? And they ran with that. And of course, Nancy and others couldn't get ahead of that argument. And this is really, it's a very instructive moment. If you go back and you look at it. And I remember speaking to it at the time, was when that first surfaced, there was about a week to 10-day lag in that narrative between the uttering of defunding the police and the official pronouncement of Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and other Democratic leaders saying, no, we're not defunding the police. That's not what we're doing. Too late. You literally had about a 24-hour window to knock that down. The fact that you allowed it to go for as long as it went solidified in the minds of a lot of voters that, oh, if we elect Democrats, they're going to defund the police. If you defund the police, there's no one to protect and serve my community. If there's no one to protect and serve my community, then my community will start to look like that community that I see on television. So you know where people are going with that. They're not voting for that. Finally, try to get in front of it, it's too late. And I think that contributed to why you saw such a bifurcation in the response in this election. In other words, what voters did was, okay, Trump, I'm done. I can't do any more of that. You're out. But Democrats in the House, nah, they gotta go. 11 seats gone. Control of the Senate, no, we think we'll keep that in the hands of the Republicans to sort of put a check on a Biden administration who, second narrative, could be held hostage to the progressive left. Trump was very successful in creating that narrative around Biden's presidency, not necessarily Biden himself. Remember, it wasn't that Biden was a progressive, because that fell flat. No one believed it. We have a 43-year history with the man. We know he may be a lot of things, but progressive he's not. So what happened was his administration would be held hostage to this progressive idea, particularly on issues of law and order. And it worked. And a lot of voters said, well, a divided government will be a better play for us. So Democrats right now have a potential 2-seat advantage in the Senate. They picked up 11 seats in the House, so the majority has narrowed there. And Biden has less of the mandate, despite an almost 8 million vote margin in his election, than the numbers would suggest, because of that, the way the voters have bifurcated their decisions. So where do we go from here? The GSA administrator last evening sends out a letter and saying after 2 weeks now that the process of the transition can proceed. Despite what she says in her letter, it is not credible nor believable that she was not under political pressure to withhold the funds and the keys to the Biden team. The president all but said that, because he can't help himself. He just can't help himself. No one can get credit for doing anything. He is going to come in and he's going to tell you, no, that happened because I made it happen. So she puts out the letter saying that no one influenced me. There was no pressure at all, right? None. He tweets out after she puts the letter out that, no, I instructed her to do it. So we're like, okay, here we go. But he can't help himself. He just, and the one thing, while I do not appreciate the man as a president, I do understand him and know this about him. He will always tell you 2 things: what he's thinking and what he's going to do. Because he believes with the first, he's the smartest one to ever thought of that. And with the second, you can't stop him. And while there's a lot of proof that the first one ain't true, there's a lot of proof that the second one is. And the fact that the president has been able to do virtually what he said he was going to do. And remember, take you back in time, don't know if you paid attention to it, but the inaugural week, the president's team doing a number of events around town. And one of those events, Reince Priebus I'm forgetting, blanking on his name. I shouldn't be. Anyway, it'll come to me. Was doing an event, and they were talking about the president's agenda, and they listed 3 priorities in their agenda. The first, Steve Bannon. So Steve Bannon and Reince Priebus were sitting on a stage, and they were talking about what the incoming president was going to do. 3 priorities. The first was what? It was healthcare. Remember, the president's sort of bought into the Republican argument of repeal and replace. It would be the first thing. Paul Ryan, then Speaker of the House, wanted done was the repeal and replacement of Obamacare. First thing. The second thing was infrastructure, which was actually Donald Trump's first thing. That's what he really wanted to do as a policy initiative. But no, Paul Ryan and Reince won that argument, led with healthcare, but infrastructure / the economy was there. And the third thing, and as you know, when anyone gives you 3 priorities, look out for the third one, because it's the third one that is actually the end game, what it is they're trying to do. And what was the third one? Deconstruct the administrative state. So Donald Trump from the very beginning told us exactly what he was going to do. He was going to tear down the institutions that we had come to rely on. He was going to break apart the alliances and relationships that we had relied on because he saw no value in them. His attack on the UN, his attack on NATO, his attack on even John McCain as a war hero, deconstructing our support for and our interest in and the good feelings we have about not just institutions, but people. And they set about for 4 years doing that. You're still seeing this play out now, deconstructing the transition process. And that's what this has been about. And the idea in doing that is who's going to stop him. The president's violation of the emoluments clause of the Constitution, who's going to stop him? No one. He never put up a Chinese wall between his businesses and his service to the nation as president. He still ran and still runs Trump Enterprises. I know how he works. I know how it works. He trust me. You can trust me. Michael Cohen, Scaramucci, all these folks who've been in the space with him, they'll tell you he does not relinquish power or control over things that has his name on it. Doesn't happen. But who's there to stop him? And so when people in Washington and around the country would reliably look to the Senate Republicans, they were like, no, we're not doing that. And the reason they didn't do it is because he'd tweet about them and say nasty things about them and turn their electorate against them. And the classic example of that is none other than Jeff Sessions. And they saw what happened to Jeff Sessions. They watched that process. They saw what happened to Senator Flake. They saw what happened to any number of Republicans who had, crossed the president. They were like, no, I want to keep my seat, or I want to keep my power, or I want to keep my influence, whatever it was they wanted to keep. And that's why the cry of country over party had such resonance, because the country looked at some of these, really important questions and was concerned that there was no check. And the ultimate check, of course, is the ballot box. So that's kind of the sense of where we are. Just as a coda on that, Donald Trump, my bet, as I'm piecing together the remaining 55 days or so of this administration, that at Christmas time, Donald Trump will go to Mar-a-Lago, and I don't think he comes back to Washington. Now, I've had a couple of folks tell me, yeah, he will, because he'd want to be, the center of attention on inauguration. I'm like, that's not how inauguration works. So I don't know. I don't see him inviting the incoming president to the White House for coffee. I don't see him leaving a note. And if he did, it probably would have 2 words in it. I just don't. I mean, he's taking this loss very personally. And again, going back to the point I made about Donald Trump telling you everything ahead of time, he told us 3 weeks ago what this transition would look like, but no one again paid attention. And it still amazes me after 4 years that no one really listens to what Donald Trump says. They react to it, but they don't listen to what he said. He did an interview 2 weeks before the election in which he said, I don't like to lose. I don't lose. I never lose. All right? So if someone told you that, what makes you think that they're going to concede at some point a loss? There's nothing that Donald Trump in the 4 years in which he clearly should have said, I'm sorry, I was wrong, et cetera, and said, no, I'm not doing that because I'm not wrong. I never admit a mistake. He tells you. Now, you may not like it. I think it's appropriate, but he's telling you, no, I never admit I'm wrong. I never admit to a mistake because I don't make mistakes. I'm the most right person I know. All right. So he told us a few weeks ago that this is what this would look like. He told us this is how this would play out. He told us he was going to flood the zone with lawsuits. He told us. So, a number of the organizations that I've been working with on voter integrity and dealing with the crises around the ballot box, et cetera, we sort of looked at and war gamed a lot of this so that we'd have an understanding of how the institutions should work. So the president has now said that he will not concede, and he's not going to concede this election. So if you're thinking that's going to happen, disabuse yourself of that. It's not happening. I think he goes away for the holidays, and I will be, put it this way, I will be very surprised if he comes back to Washington at all. And if he does, it will be for the limited purposes of just closing up whatever he has at the White House. But I suspect he's doing and has been doing some of that now. Two, I was surprised if he goes to the inauguration. I don't see him participating in that. I don't see him coming down those stairs to sit off to the side and watch Joe Biden become president. And that's the ultimate humiliation for him. And I just don't see him doing it. And so I just think the country's got to kind of deal with that and move on. Actually, not even deal with, just kind of move on. And so the norms around transition, the norms around the pageantry and all of that related to an inauguration, already tempered by COVID-19, will be made more so by the behavior of the president in some regards. Now, I hope he does. I hope he comes back, and I hope he participates. I hope he invites Joe Biden to the White House, and I hope he leaves him a letter on the Resolute desk. And I hope he participates in the inauguration, because it is what a president does.